Joining me today is independent journalist Belle DeYoung for the European Correspondence. And we were going to speak today about abortion access, here in America as well as over where she is at in the European Union. Belle, thanks for coming on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm all right. I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've, been following your work for almost a year now, and I've noticed that there's a lot of talk over where you live across the seas there over in Malta and other places in the European Union about abortion access all around the continent right now. And I was just wondering, first and foremost, how did you get involved in this work? Like, what made you want to work in and around abortion access advocacy, and how did this all start for you, something that you wanted to focus on?
It definitely started when I moved to Malta, which is, as you said, it's an EU member state. It's in the European Union. It's an independent country as well, and it is the only country in the EU that has a full abortion ban. At the time when I moved here, it was to the point where if your life is at risk as a woman, you cannot have access to an abortion. It's simply not done. Only recently has there been a minor change, which says that if your life is at risk and you get three doctors to sign off on it, you can have an abortion. That's never happened, and it's also highly unlikely that it will actually happen. So we still call it a ban because it is a ban. And then after 4 years of living here, I happened to get pregnant myself, and I had to have an abortion, which meant that I had to go to the Netherlands for that and have the procedure there. Unless you want to stay here and order pills, which is technically illegal, you can go to prison for it. That has never happened before, but you can be sentenced up to 3 years. And there are actually women under investigation right now for having an abortion here. So
Wow.
that is how it's.
Okay, so let me just back up a little bit here. You have women who are currently being investigated in Malta for having an abortion, and you have to have three different doctors sign off on it just before you so you can get one in general. How did this all happen? I know that in America there's quite a different things that we could probably point to about like how these chain of events come into place. But as somebody who doesn't really know too much about what's happening in Malta, how exactly did it get to this point right now? Has it always been this way? Is this recent? What's going on over there?
It's a really good question, right? Because another example in the EU is Poland, where recently in the past few years, a lot of abortion rights have been taken away from women. So they've
Yeah.
kind of gone back in time, like what has happened in the US as well, and and what do you call it? And is under threat of happening in other countries as well. In Malta, we never got to the point where women had abortion access or reproductive rights whatsoever. Even the morning after pill wasn't actually available up until a few years ago in every pharmacy. Like it was pretty hard to get. And it's been like this mostly, or maybe even exclusively, because of Catholic influence. Around 95 or even more percent of the population is Catholic. And
Yeah.
because it's a small island, it's like an island state and it's very urbanized. It's like a city in the Mediterranean on a rock. It's very isolated from foreign influence and it's very stuck in its traditions. So certain things in terms of progress don't really happen here. And what doesn't help at all, of course, is that the large majority of the population is actually against abortion because of the church, right? Like it's very,
Okay.
like they value life and it's very precious to them, and they do not think that a woman's life should ever be put over the life of a fetus.
Okay, so that definitely puts, if you are trying to seek an abortion in a very like troublesome place, what is like the closest place that you can go to if you were to leave Malta? You said that you had to go to the Netherlands, for instance. Was that the closest place you could go to, or is there options available for people who are trying to get off the island? Like, how hard is it for those who are trying to seek any kind of abortion access if they need it?
Yeah, it's actually pretty difficult. The Netherlands is not the closest place, but it is probably one of the more reliable places where it is affordable. For me, as a Dutch citizen, it was free, but even with European insurance, you don't pay as much as you would pay in certain countries.
Yeah,
A lot of people go to the UK because it's a former colony and they speak English there. The healthcare is reliable. The closest would be Italy. And I assume that if you go to Rome or one of the big cities, it's quite accessible there and you can do it. However, even in Italy, there is a lot of Catholic stigma, and there are certain health providers that refuse to give abortions, especially in rural areas that, of course, Maltese women wouldn't necessarily go to. But in Italy, there are
right.
also many issues accessing abortion in general. So it's usually these countries, like especially the UK. The Netherlands, I believe Germany as well, where people feel safe and can afford to have an abortion while also being able to speak in English with the healthcare providers.
Right. So back in February, you got a chance to moderate what was the first ever discussion on Malta's abortion ban at the European Parliament, which I think is pretty cool. I just wanted to say that. That's pretty cool. And for you, was that really important for you? And, if so, like, why did that have significance?
Definitely, yes. As far as I'm aware, I was the first person in Malta to ever speak about having an abortion. Because I had
Yeah.
it abroad, technically I cannot be prosecuted for that. It's not possible. Because I am originally from the Netherlands, I don't have the family and community stigma that comes with it. I have my friends here who are all very accepting and very progressive. And yes, I get the harassment or like the occasional comment and people disagreeing with me, but there is no one close to me who would find it outrageous and murderous of me to have an abortion, right? Um, so that having said that, having been at least one of the very first people to ever publicly speak out about having an abortion here in Malta on national TV, I was speaking. It means so much to be able to bring that to the European public sphere and actually have the discussion on a European level because it is difficult to bring change from within Malta, mostly because it is so stigmatized. There is a big part of the population that doesn't agree with abortion, even when a woman's life is at risk. And even though the sentiment is kind of shifting, it still is something that I feel has to come both from within Malta and from external actors that are, you know, that actually care about women in Malta, which
Yeah.
sometimes feels like it's very neglected. We're a small country. It's 500,000 people that live here. That's not even a big city in the US, you know? So it's easy to overlook, I guess. But it's
Yeah.
also the strictest abortion ban we have in Europe, and it's something that the EU should be paying attention to and should be talking about. And the fact that I got to bring my personal experience to the table and speak about that in Brussels, that was incredible, really. And I think we really did set a precedent for having these political discussions as well.
No, I think that's absolutely important. Like personally, I think that's really important that these things are being discussed, especially since it was the first time it's ever happened. That's just, again, you always do like, oh, in 2024, this has happened. But seriously though, first time. Um, Roe v. Wade fell back in like 2022 here in America, and it was a pretty big shockwave for a lot of people here in the country. People couldn't believe that it actually happened. 50 years it had been in place. No one thought that it would ever actually be taken down. And now states across our country are putting in these just ridiculous abortion bans, 6 weeks a lot of times in a lot of these states that we're seeing over in the Southeast. And it's got a lot of people kind of like worried about what's going to happen next. And we have been seeing some states here in America enshrine these rights into their constitutions. So that's kind of going to make it pretty impossible for them to ever be taken away again. But with that being said, there's always efforts to roll things back. And that's kind of what I was wondering next is that something similar to that happening over where you're at? Do you see, because you mentioned Poland earlier, but are there other like nations like in the EU who are attempting to roll back these rights right now? Like, what are you seeing over there?
As far as I'm aware, not actively on a political level right now. However, there are obviously growing far-right movements. I mean, even both in the European Parliament and in national governments, we have elected quite a lot of far-right parties and politicians who tend to have
Yeah.
the same conservative values and to be against these reproductive rights, for example.
Yeah.
So we know that in our like My Voice, My Choice movement, we are aware that there are pro-life marches, for example, in certain capitals, which is something that I had not heard of happening a few years ago or earlier. So it is something that I think people see that it happened in the US and they're aware that, okay, there might be political ground for actually wanting to take back women's rights to the same extent that where we elect far-right politicians, we also kind of validate those views, right? If you see that half a government, half a parliament is made up of far-right politicians, then it becomes kind of permissible to express those views a lot more. So you definitely hear these sentiments more often, I feel, than you would hear them a few years ago. And in the Netherlands, for example, with our far-right government, I know that certain NGOs didn't want to work on the My Voice, My Choice campaign because they really wanted to focus on the national things going on there. They were like, we actually have so much to deal with these far-right ideas being spread that we can't look at Europe right now. We really have to focus our efforts here. So I definitely think it's something that is happening both on a national level and on a Europe-wide level.
Okay, so what is being like? You're spending some time in Parliament. Obviously, you're getting a chance to speak with people who are directly making laws, who are directly trying to either put new legislation in place or tear down previous bad legislation. There's always people who are going to be trying to put in their agendas, obviously. What are you getting a sense of like on the ground, like when you're like at the parliament? Is there work being done right now as far as trying to like protect abortion access, or does that feel like not so important because so many countries do kind of give access to it? So like where is that at right now?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely not a priority for voters, for example, like it is or was now in the US. We
Yeah.
had our European Parliament elections back in June, and abortion was not one of the main concerns. We had the climate, immigration, the economy, but abortion itself is in most countries actually accessible.
Hmm.
Not necessarily to the full extent. Like, for example, the Netherlands is a really great example of where we do have great abortion access up until, I believe, 24 weeks. It's free. It is easily like available. People can travel places, and it's never too far from someone's home, let's say. But then there are countries like Poland and Malta that are in a really dire state, and countries like Italy or Austria where it simply isn't available everywhere, even though it is legal.
Yeah.
But because then, for example, France recently constitutionalized the right to abortion, there is actually progress, especially a few years ago. That also means that it's not one of our biggest concerns, I would say, because there are so many countries where it is actually properly available.
So the kind of like the final question I had for you around all of this is that I think one of the reasons why I thought it was, kind of like really cool that you got a chance to speak, I got the European Parliament, not just the fact that it was like the first of its kind that you were able to do that, but also, here in America, it feels like someone who's younger, for instance, almost never gets a seat at the table when it comes to any discussion, let alone one that's directly at, like the actual government itself. It's like trying to pull teeth to get anything done in this country. Like truthfully speaking, kind of like breaks a lot of people's spirits as far as I'm concerned. So I'm kind of just wondering, as somebody who's directly involved in that over there, does it feel easier to actually influence change over in the European Union? Do you feel like you actually have some good representation over there? Do you feel like there are actually allies who are helping, trying to like fight for the right things, or does it feel maybe more similar to how we feel, where it's like you're kind of lucky if you actually can find somebody who's actually advocating for you, actually is standing up for you? Like, what is the mood over there as far as you're concerned? Someone who actually works directly like with these people.
I would say we're probably in a better state than the US regarding this. The EU definitely prioritizes youth empowerment and working with young people a lot. Like we do have a seat at the table. We can bring a lot of input and our concerns to the table. Let's say there are things called European youth events, which happen every 2 years, where European citizens under 30, I believe, gather and talk about democracy and rule of law and like whatever they find important. However, sometimes these things can feel very performative. Like, okay, yes, we have events, we have someone on a flyer who is under 30. There are some young
Yeah.
MEPs who are elected, which is very cool, member of European Parliament. Not everything actually translates into the policy that we envision. That said, of course, there are also countries where you can vote from the age of 16. So there are definitely efforts in, for example, lowering the voting age and trying to empower young people and a lot of communications campaigns focusing on young people at the same time. But then there are also these criticisms of that, where it's like, yeah, we focus on empowering youth, but then they actually bring something to the table and it's more of a photo opportunity than it actually brings concrete change. Simply because it's also very bureaucratic. The European Union, it's 27 different countries trying to make law together. That's something that you can't just change in a day or two, especially if you don't know the entire kind of framework that it it functions within. So yeah, I think it's a double-sided sword where it's like we do have a seat at the table, but maybe our voices aren't taken as seriously as we would like them to be.
Well, that is both encouraging, but also still kind of makes you feel like, well, room for improvement, right? I mean, it's better than what we're dealing with. I mean, it feels as though we have to, go through the toughest gauntlet that you've ever seen in your life just to possibly even like get these people on the phone, let alone get any real change to come through. So I feel better knowing that there's something better out there somewhere in the universe.
For sure.
So. Belle Young, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know that you also talk about, like mental health access, and as well as I've seen you talk about Gaza and Lebanon quite a bit. For those who are interested in learning more about you, like what other kind of topics do you cover and where can they find you at online?
Yeah, I would say that that's it. I'm mostly active on Instagram at Belle de Jong, where I talk a lot about Gaza and Palestine. I talk a lot about media bias, especially there, but also on other topics. Reproductive rights, mental health, as you said, my personal journey, anything happening in Europe or Malta or the Netherlands. Yeah, I think that's about it.
All right. Well, for those who are interested, there'll be some links in the episode description. So if you go ahead and click in there now, you will see those links. Thank you so much for checking out this show, and we will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching this video of Independent Thought. If you liked the conversation, please go ahead and give the video itself a like and be sure to subscribe for future episodes on